Right, so we've got a brand new feature on Retro Robbins. We've got a retro star from the past on the phone and maybe still of the future. The guy that seemingly done the impossible, or told me it was technically too difficult, but yet he managed to port this game from the Spectrum to the Commodore 64 head over heels. He's one of the Ocean Elite from back in the 80s and 90s. Or I don't know when he actually left, but we'll get to that in a moment and see what he did after the days of Ocean. A fully nice gentleman, well respected by all of the community, and indeed he very rarely does interviews, but he's agreed to come on the Retro Robbins show. We hit it off quite well when I visited a certain museum up in London, where he showed me some of the latest things that he was doing with an Amiga and shall we say Atari ST version of Head Over Heels. Gave me a joystick, gave me a play. I wasn't any good, and I said, oh, can't play this game, the joystick's no good. So what did he do? Well, he swapped the joystick. So I had no excuses, and I was still rubbish. But this gentleman, who was, let's say, just a few years older than me, played this game like it was easy, and showed me things that I never even knew, and he's a really nice guy. So, if you haven't guessed already, who is this fine gentleman? They're known as the granddaddy of the Ocean team back in them days by one or two. It is indeed Colin Porch. And still coding to this day, and believe he's brought a new ST version. There's a new game released, Head Over Heels. So what we'll do now, you can hear the music of Head Over Heels playing in the background. We'll just switch views to me here, and we'll get on with the interview. So, ladies and gentlemen, introducing you to a legend of the industry. Colin, take it away. So, let's ring the phone.
Good afternoon, Wayne.
Good afternoon, Colin, and thank you for taking the time to do this interview.
Not a problem.
First question, and I've got a few questions coming. How did it all start, and where did it begin?
Well, I mean, for me, it started learning to program in machine code with a plug-in. Remember the old days of the Atari things where you bought a cartridge and you plugged the cartridge.
Got one now in the
things, and then you plugged a different cartridge. Well, I didn't have an Atari, but I had something similar by a company called Radafin, and they introduced what they called a hobby module. And they advertise it, if you buy one of these, you can put your own games in. And I thought, oh, what a good idea. And at 85 quid, and we're talking about the late 70s, this was an awful lot of money. But I did buy one, and only when I got it did I realise that I had to actually program this thing in Signetics 2650, which was the chip that it had. I had to learn how to do it. The instruction book that came with it, full of errors. I'm amazed that anybody managed to get it to work at all. But that's how I first taught myself how to program in machine code on that particular machine. And I wrote a couple of games on it, and of course which had no commercial viability at all. But at the time, the local people were starting to ask about things like the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64 that was just coming out. And there was an advertisement in the local paper asking for programmers, which I responded to. And I said, well, I've only got this hobby module thing yet, which is not really what you're talking about, but I'm sure I can transfer the games that I put on here onto one of those. And the guy's name was Richard Andrews. He lived in Northampton. He came to see me, and I bought a Commodore 64, and I translated this game from the hobby module, which went on to become California Gold Rush on the Commodore 64.
Wow.
Unfortunately, Mr. Andrews was not what he seemed. He put the game on the market, and but didn't pay me a penny. Borrowed my brand new colour printer that my father had bought me, supposedly for advertising purposes, and then disappeared.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I have to be grateful to him, because it was on the basis of that particular game on the Commodore that I got a post with Imagine Software in Liverpool in the early 1980s, and of course I was one of the few people, I think, that actually went to Liverpool to find work. There you go. And of course, Imagine went bust a few months later, leaving me with a mortgage and all sorts of trouble.
Yeah.
And I was lucky again to be taken on one of four. They were only going to take on two, but four of us were taken on. There's about 30 of us descended from Imagine.
Yeah, because in them days you didn't really get royalties for any games you played, did you? You were just paid a one.
No, you were paid a basic salary for writing. If you wrote the game yourself,
yeah,
you know, not as an employee, but as an individual, then yes, you could sell that to who you liked. You know, I don't remember signing anything that said if I wrote a game I couldn't market it with whoever I liked, but once I was working for a software company, I didn't have a lot of time to do anything creative myself. Not that I was particularly good at that anyway.
Yeah, did you, when you was at Imagine, did you mainly just concentrate on Commodore stuff, or was there ports for...
It was all on Commodore stuff, and it wasn't what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
What I was detailed to do was to produce a game for toddlers.
Yeah.
And this was effectively, I call it a game. It would be a game for them, but it was an exercise in getting toddlers to recognise shapes and colours.
Yeah.
At the basic levels, they were just simply trying to match a cross with a cross or a circle with a circle or whatever, all on a moving train. And in the later stages, they were asked to identify not only the shape but the colour of the shape. There would be two of the same shape that were different colours, and you had to match the one that matched the one they were trying to find. But it wasn't really it wasn't a game as such, but it was an educational toy application for very young people, very young children.
And then obviously you moved from Imagine to Ocean?
No, I moved from there to Software Projects.
Software Projects.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to remember, Wayne, that I was very much twice as old as most of these programmers at the time. I mean, I was in my, you know, I was born in 1945, so in 1975, I was already a fair old age.
So you couldn't be classed as a bedroom coder, more of a...
Indeed not. Most of my colleagues were in either their late teens or their early 20s.
Yeah.
But anyway, again, I think it was what I'd done already. I moved to Software Projects. There I worked on things like Dragon's Lair.
Oh, yes.
and subsequently Dragon's Lair 2.
Wow.
And Harvey Smith's Show Jumper. That was a performance and a half with Harvey Smith, because we suffered two setbacks with that. I mean, the week before it was due to be released, Harvey Smith himself walked off with somebody else's wife.
Oh.
And that was all pretty much frowned upon in those days.
Yeah. And
W.H. Smith and Woolworths and all the places a lot of the places that would stock this program said they wouldn't stock it because of that.
And then how long was you at Software Projects for?
Well, maybe 3 years, maybe 2.5 years.
That's quite a while. It's quite a while, isn't it?
I did Dragon's Lair, the original Dragon's Lair. I did Harvey Smith's Show Jumper, and I worked on the second version of Dragon's Lair, Return to Caesar's Castle, and I was working on that when I got a telephone call from Colin Stokes, who I had known from Imagine days, but who was now working for Ocean. Yeah. And I think he had heard how upset I was with Software Projects at the time, because they simply were not doing what they promised to do. In particular, the first year we were there, we got quite a handsome Christmas bonus. Yeah. And okay, because you know Dragon's Lair did well, and a couple of other programs did well as well. And the second year, I was invited with my wife to go and spend Christmas with a friend of ours in the East Midlands. And I didn't have a lot of money. the software projects didn't pay anything much as Imagine had done. But I went to Tommy Barton, who was the big boss there, and I said, look, I know we haven't had quite as good a year, and I shall fully understand if we don't get a Christmas bonus, but I do need to know if I'm going to get one, because if I'm not going to get one, I can't afford to go on this Christmas break with friends, because I won't be able to pay my way. And he said, no, you'll definitely get your Christmas bonus. I said, well, I need to be able to rely on that, Tommy, because once I say I'm going, I will commit myself. No, you take it from me, your bonus is in the bag. Well, I did take it from him, the bonus was never paid.
I think we could see where we was going with that, couldn't we? Yeah.
It put me and my friend, because it ran my friend out of money as well, into one hell of a position, and I was not best pleased about it.
Yeah.
But anyway, Colin Stokes rang me at Software Projects and said, we have a vacancy for a 64 program. If you're not interested, I'll hang up. But if you are, I'll carry on talking. I said, no, carry on talking. And they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I put my notice in to Software Projects. They wouldn't pay me the holiday money that they owed me. And I took the disc that I'd been working on home and told them, that they'd get the disc back when they honoured their commitments. They called the police. The police came round to my house, and I said, well, I understand stealing is wishing to permanently deprive somebody. I don't wish to permanently deprive Software Projects of this disc, but I do need to use it as leverage to get money that they owe me. And the police said, well, we've been told it's been stolen. I said, well, I'm telling you the different. And we don't think it's a good idea. You should hang on to it. Well, I rang Colin Stokes again. I said, this is a position. He said, give them the disc back. We will pay the holiday pay that they won't pay you. So I said, fair enough. So I did. And I never went back to Software Projects. And they promptly took me off the credits for the game. I think that was illegal, but they did it anyway.
That's a shame.
And then I moved to Ocean, and I had all the hits and whatever that I did at Ocean. I loved my time at Ocean.
So out of all of them, did you have fond major memories of Imagine? Was that okay, or?
No, I didn't have anything detrimental about Imagine, except I didn't like the work I was working on.
Yeah.
I thought I'd be working on games, proper games, but they wanted me to do this, and they were paying for me. So,
okay, so we've moved now up to Ocean, and what was the first things that you were asked to work on? Was it games there, or?
Oh no, it was always games. I was never asked to work on anything else apart from games. I think the first project I worked on then, I'm really not absolutely certain about this because it's a long time ago and the dates gets picked up. But I think it was a project called Double Take. It was a game called Double Take.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
I had no confidence in the game at all. I didn't think it had lasting playability. I don't think there was much appeal to it. It was about a game that involved two parallel universes that sort of switched from one to the other, and you had to perform various tasks. And when you were halfway through it, you might find that the screen all changed, and you're now back in the other universe, and you had to change things around again.
Yeah. So, notoriously, you've done quite a few famous games for Ocean, sort of ports for Commodore 64. One in particular springs to mind, and if I hit a button, the port of Head Over Heels that somebody told you probably wasn't possible on the Commodore 64.
Well, I didn't know at the time. I'd done a very successful version of Operation Wolf.
Yeah.
And I received an awful lot of correspondence about Operation Wolf, which we'll talk about in a minute if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
But after Operation Wolf, I was approached by Gary Bracey, that was my immediate boss at Ocean,
yeah,
and showed the game foot and mouth, it was called, in its experimental stages, on the Spectrum and the Amstrad that had been developed by John Rittman and Bernie Raymond. its name was subsequently changed to Head Over Heels, and I was asked, could that be reproduced on the Commodore 64? And I looked at it, and the more I looked at it, the more dubious I became. And I said, well, to be honest, Gary, I don't know. It's not going to be easy because there's an awful lot of processing power required in geometric three-dimensional geometric outputs. But I'll give it my best shot if you want me to. And that's how it was given to me. Now, I wasn't aware at the time that the same job had already been offered to various other C64 programmers, and they'd all said, no, it couldn't be done. The processor was too slow and didn't have enough facilities. So I didn't know that. If I'd have known that at the time, I probably would have said the same thing. But I have a lot. You have a lot of respect for other people that do the same thing you do. But anyway, I tackled it. I got an awful lot of help from John Rittman over the phone and program code that was very well commented, etc. Effectively, I was trying to copy code that I really didn't understand what it was doing. But as long as my program did the same as theirs did, the result should be the same, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I've got a question here from a person from the industry, an upstart by the name of Jim Badley, who wanted me to put a question.
Jim Badley very well.
Yeah, I know him too. And he wants to know, what was the technical difficulties in getting that to work on the Commodore?
Well, basically, it's the processing time. If you imagine, can you imagine the Head Over Heels screen when you look at it?
Yeah.
It's a three-dimensional image, and it's made up of a fixed background, which will have a wall and a floor and a door and things like that, and various other components that may or may not be fixed, but which have to be put to the screen, put to the image, in a very definite order. And effectively, what we would call a linked list. So you would start off with nothing in the list apart from the room itself, the background. Then you put an object in the room. That was easy. That was in front of everything. But then you put another object in the room, and now you went through the list, determining whether this particular object had to be printed before or after the objects that you've already got there. Where was its place in the list? And then eventually, when you'd filled the room with all the objects that you had, then that particular part of the room, that would then be generated and put to the screen.
Yeah. Very,
very complicated way, believe me.
So, yeah, I've played the Commodore game and I'm well impressed with it. It doesn't seem any different to the Spectrum version, but a little bit more colourful, by John Rickman and Bernard Drummond. They're titled on the top screen, and you're the man that managed to port it for the Commodore 64, which is an amazing achievement, and everyone admits that. So,
well, it got the highest score ever, I think, in ZAP 64, which was the 64 magazine of the time. Yeah, I was very pleased with it. I really was very pleased with it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic game, and so you've actually ported that from Commodore. You've actually done that for the Atari ST as well, haven't you?
Well, what happened was that after I did Head Over Heels, I was loaned by Ocean to a company in Liverpool called Special Effects.
Yeah.
That was being run by one of their previous associates, I think. I can't remember his name now. I will remember it, but I can't remember it at the moment. But I was on loan to them, trying to work programs on the Nintendo Game Boy, which used the same processor, but in a totally different way to the Commodore 64. And during my spare time, I wanted to get to grips with the 68000 processor, which was what was used by the Atari ST and the Amiga. They both use the same processor. Super processor, I was told. And I thought, well, what better thing that I do than I try to see if I can create Head Over Heels based on the C64 code and port it over to the Atari ST. Of course, the Atari ST and the Amiga, much more complicated machines, much more colours available.
Yeah.
We could only use monochrome on the Commodore. They could use 4 colours on the Amstrad and the Spectrum. And now all of a sudden we got 16 colours available on the Atari, on the ST. So I modified all the graphics so that they now became in a rather a super picture mode rather than just sort of the basic 1 or 2 colours. And created all the code, doing exactly the same work in exactly the same way, except with a different processor. And then when it was finished, I did all that in my spare time at home. I bought an ST to do it with. When it was finished, I went to Ocean and I said, well, you know, I've done this. It hasn't got any sound, because I'm no sound engineer. I don't know how to produce sound. But if you want the game, you know, here it is. And of course they did want it. They got somebody else to do the sound, and it was quite an easy port from there onto the Amiga, because it's the same processor. You know, the screen output's different, the keyboard input's different, and various sound is totally different. But the whole game itself is the code is exactly the same.
Yeah, so out of all of the systems that you've worked on, is there any particular favourite, the one that you enjoyed doing the most, or is it what's new sort of thing?
I think Head Over Heels and Operation Wolf. I'll come back to Operation Wolf now.
Yeah.
Can you remember the Operation Wolf, what it looked like on the screen?
Yes, where it's first, well, it's kind of like you just got a soldier that scrolled across you. I used it with a light gun, I think, in...
you had it, well, there were light guns available on various models, but yeah, effectively you had sort of something like 2/3 of the screen, which scrolled from right to left, from left to right, and the right-hand side of the screen was denoted to your ammunition levels and what rockets you'd got and things like that, which of course was stationary. Now, I don't know how much you know about the internals of the Commodore 64, but it has its own scrolling mechanism.
Which the Spectrum didn't. So,
exactly. But if you scrolled it from left to right, you could only scroll the whole screen.
Wow, interesting.
You couldn't scroll 2/3 of it.
Oh, wow, that could be, yeah.
And here was me, apparently scrolling just 2/3 of the screen and having the other third stationary. And Ocean got no end of letters and communications. You know, how has Colin managed to interrupt the scrolling mechanism? And I mean, those that were interested, I told them how I did it. But you know, Gary Bracey told me off. You shouldn't be divulging things like that.
Black magic.
yeah. You know, but you know, effectively, each character on the screen is made up of 8 bits by 8 bits. So you've got a character. If you've got a character that makes up a letter A, for example, and then you use the screen scroll, that particular character will move 1 bit at a time, and then when it gets to the last bit, you transfer the whole character onto the next character column, and then it looks as if the whole thing is scrolling all permanently from left to right, or right to left, whichever one you choose. But if you scroll it, as you scroll it, if you manipulate the data that makes up that character in the opposite direction, then it appears to be standing still on the screen. It is in fact scrolling, but the data that makes it up makes it look as if it's standing still. So all the ammunition and the rockets and things, they were really scrolling, but I was changing the data that made up the characters in synchronization with the scroll mechanism of the computer.
Brilliant, clever, very clever, an innovative way round the issue, shall we say? So what's happening with you now? You're still creating games. Apparently, you've done a recent version of Head Over Heels, I believe.
Well, it's not recent so much, Wayne. What happened was that in 1989, I started doing a version 2 of Head Over Heels on the Atari ST.
Yeah.
Right. My plans were to make it somewhat bigger than the original with more features, and I knew damn well that it would not fit into the Commodore because the Commodore had been pretty much stretched with the first game, if you see what I mean. So
Yeah.
I forgot about the Commodore, and I worked on the ST trying to produce a version 2, and I got, Ocean knew about it, but it was my own personal project. It wasn't being done in Ocean's time. They weren't paying me for it. And then Ocean decided that they were going to stop producing games for home micros anymore.
Yeah.
And they dispensed with my services. I became redundant, if you like. They very quickly offered me work as a freelance in trying to port Paracel SARS over onto the Commodore 64. And I did take that on, but then all sorts of things happened. My wife left me, and before she left me, she damaged all the discs I've been working on, and it all got very messy.
Indeed.
But the net result was that Paracel Stars got finished. It didn't get finished. It had got up to a certain point, and Ocean couldn't spare the time for it to be finished anymore. So I stopped work on it. And now that they've stopped producing games for home micros as well, there didn't seem a lot of point in finishing the version 2 of the Head Over Heels. It wasn't going to be marketed, so what was the point? So I stopped work on that as well. So I'd done quite a lot of work on it, but it just stopped, and the equipment got put away, and I never used it. And shortly after all this happened, this is in 1992 now, I left Liverpool to set up home with a lady that I'd met while on holiday, and we were together for 30 odd years, so
that's a good run.
years anyway. And I took all my equipment with me. Now that didn't get touched now until well into the 2000s. I went to an Ocean reunion where we used to meet up with the old staff every now and again, and the old bosses, whatever. We were still a very happy group, even though Ocean had ceased to be some time earlier. And at one of these reunions, Gary Bracey asked me what happened to the version 2 of Head Over Heels that you were doing. I said, well, I stopped work on it, it's gathering dust. And he said, well, you need to finish it. Big demand for these retro games now, I said, really? He said, yeah, honestly. I said, oh, well, I dragged the ST out to the garage, but it wouldn't work. The monitor wouldn't work, and one of the disk drives wouldn't work, and so many things were wrong with it that nearly they gave up there and then. But I managed to get the whole lot working again, and
yes,
I started work on it again.
Because times have changed a little bit now, where you don't have to need a company to distribute a game that you've created. People actually can pay for it and download it off the internet now.
Well,
yeah,
but there is a bit of a snag there, Wayne, unfortunately. This is the snag. The original game, the original Head Over Heels that was put together by John Rickman and Burton Trummer,
right,
became the property of Ocean Software.
Yeah.
And my version 2 used the same characters, Head, Heels, Robot Charlie, and all the rest of it. All the same things that were in the original are in my sequel. But I don't have the rights to those characters. So if I wanted to put it on the market, I'd either have to change the game around totally, and it would become a different game. A different game with the same attributes, and I'm sure somebody would complain that you've pinched these ideas and you're pinching this and pinching that, but with the same attributes and so on. Or we could try and find out who now had the IP rights, the intellectual property rights, and do a deal with them. And a company in Canada, by an old friend of mine, Andy Roberts, approached me and said, well, I'd like to put it on the market, if it's finished. I said, yeah, it's finished, but this is the snag. Well, he eventually eventually identified who held the IP rights to these characters, and they originally said yes, you know, you can go ahead, and we can come to some arrangement about royalties and things. And then John Rittman let loose the bombshell that he was going to produce a version 2 himself. Now, he being the original creator of the game, he was probably going to have a bit more clout than I was going to have, if you see what I mean, when it came to sequels. And at this point, the IP owner decided not to let us have the rights to do it after all.
Oh, shame.
So we were back in limbo land where we had this game, but we could distribute for free, but we couldn't sell it.
That's a shame. So you don't really get anything for your hard work?
Exactly.
Oh, dear.
Now, my understanding is, and I'm by no means sure about this, but he has now changed his mind again, I think, because John Rittman has decided after all that he's just not up to it. And so the game is being copied onto the Amiga, I know, and we're hoping that we're going to get it onto PCs and get people better than it. It will already work on an emulator on a PC. Yeah. I have an emulator here, and I can put it onto an emulator and work on it, play it on my PC. And in fact, I've got various videos of it being played on my PC.
Wasn't you playing that when I met you at the museum and you were showing me a few screens that nobody had ever seen before?
Exactly.
And that's where I made the excuse that the joystick wasn't very good because I was rubbish. And you showed me up.
Well, the joysticks do tend to be a bit temperamental. But yeah.
It wasn't the joystick, was it, Colin? It was me. And when you started playing it and making it look easy, I thought...
Well, I mean, I do have it. I have the ST on the desk by my left, but I do have it on the PC as well. And the difference is the joystick on my left is tiny. You'll remember what it looks like. But I had to buy a joystick to use it on the PC, and that's maybe a foot high, and it's got buttons all over it, and goodness, it wasn't expensive, but far more complicated joystick than the one that we were using on the.
So let's bring this forward a little bit. So what are you doing these days? Are you fully retired, or are you still doing things?
I am retired from work as such. Yeah. I play a lot of bridge, Wayne.
Bridge.
For the last few years, I have been teaching people to play bridge online. I haven't been doing it now for about a year, but vast majority of my students, much to my surprise, have been from the USA and Canada.
It's quite an old game.
Well, I mean, you know, they play a totally different form of bridge to us. I don't know if you play bridge, but it has its...
I've played it. I'm not that great at it either. Neither was I any good at chess or anything like that, but I've played bridge.
No, but you know, I was teaching them how to play the cards, not how to bid the cards.
Yeah.
But I did it, and, you know, they'd all pay me sort of 20 quid a week, and it's supplementing my income. But to be honest, Wayne, I don't need the money. I enjoyed the work.
So it's just a passion there, really.
I'm not saying I'm rich. I'm comfortable. That's all. But,
as long as you're
my
happy.
partner that we were together, as I mentioned, for 20 odd years, she died 3 years ago. So I'm pretty much on my own. I still play a lot of bridge. I play golf badly, and I go to the local bowls club now, which is something I just took up a few months ago, and I really enjoy that too. So, but as far as work is concerned, I don't program much. I do occasionally get myself involved with programming on Excel spreadsheets and things like that to help people out. If they, you know, I can't get it to do this, I'll give it to me, I'll have a go. That sort of thing. You know?
Okay, Colin, well, that's been fantastic. One last question, and it's always a tough one to ask, is what's the question that nobody's ever asked you wished had been asked?
Oh, crikey.
It's always a tough one, that.
That is a tough one. Well, no one's ever asked me what my favourite machine was to work on.
Well, there we go. What is your favourite machine to work on?
It is the Atari ST.
Not the Amiga.
Not the Amiga. I've never owned an Amiga. That may make a difference. But I've got in front of me a book. Now this must go back to the 1980s, and it's labelled Atari. One of the big problems that we had in the old days was that you might buy a machine and you might try to program for it, but you'd come across something that you didn't know how to operate. And if the manufacturers were helpful, they would tell you. Commodore was superb. You got stuck on anything with a Commodore machine, and they would sort it out for you. And they would call you back and say, yeah, you should have done this with this memory, whatever. And Atari, in the early days, were just the opposite. The 800, the early 6502 Ataris, you couldn't get any technical information from them at all. At least I couldn't. Maybe the companies could, but it made it very difficult to write machines. But the thing that impresses me about the Atari, and it would be the Amiga as well, is the processor. The processor has been designed by programmers to work in the way that programmers want it to work. And I don't know if you're into machine code or assembly programming.
A little bit, not as much as I want. I think I'm that age now where it doesn't go in as quite as well. You forget a lot of things, as you know, as you get older. And to be fair, you've probably forgot more than I'll ever know. But
well, I've forgotten an awful lot. I haven't touched a computer. I tried to find when I moved to Bedfordshire in 1992. I was moving to be with my partner, but in a quite a tiny cottage.
Yeah.
The space was very much at a premium, and all the Commodore I had, including a dot matrix printer, an Epson printer, and several disk drives, and a D128 and C128 rather. It all went into the attic because I wasn't using it. But eventually, she said, we've got to make some space. I tried to give it away. I offered it free to anybody that wants this Commodore equipment. Come and collect it. Nobody wanted it, and eventually it went to the tip.
Oh, such a shame.
And,
such a shame.
That was horrific. It was a big part of my life went there,
Yeah, and I bet he'd be worth an absolute fortune now because of the history, but hindsight is a wonderful thing, Colin?
Well, the Atari that I have now is that dates back to the 1980s.
Yeah.
And it's had so much memory added to it, so I can do development work on it as well. That went wrong a little while ago, and I was scouring the internet and talking to all my friends. I don't know if you know a guy called Mike Me, but he's quite into old computers and games and things.
Yeah.
And I got in touch with him. Well, this is what's happened, Mike. Anything you can suggest? He said, well, all I can suggest is take the top off and unplug the keyboard and unplug the drive, and then make sure the contacts are clean, and then plug them back in again, and then try it. And he says, I doubt whether it'll work. I doubt it'll be as simple as that, but you can try it. So I'm not very good at taking things to pieces, but that's what I did, and it's working again. So for the moment, another big problem with the Atari ST is that if I want to use the discs that the Atari ST produces and put them onto a PC, they have to be double-sided, double density. And you can't buy double-sided, double density discs anymore. The ones I've got now, and I'm running out of them, they came from the United States, and even then they cost a fortune. The Atari ST will work with other discs, but then I can't put them onto the PC. The PC disk drive won't read them. The portable disk drive that I have to read them won't.
Okay, Colin, well that's fantastic. I'm going to have to call it a day there. The interview's quite long. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the memories that you've provided for many a happy childhood, shall we say. It's been an absolute pleasure and honour talking to you. And
delightful to talk to you too.
God bless you. And you take care, and we'll speak again soon in the future. I hope to see you at some...
If you ever want to see a video of this going on and being played, I have it as a background on a Zoom link-up, so...
Oh, definitely.
Link up with Zoom and you can see us on the background, yeah. One of these days.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you. God bless.
Lovely talking to you.
And you.
Take care. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So here it is, the amazing port to the Commodore. This is indeed the Commodore 64 version of Head Over Heels. The game that wasn't thought possible, but what a game indeed. In fact, the only real difference you notice is when you change through screens. It just takes an extra, shall we say, second longer than normal, but even the swapping of the characters is pretty simple. So you've got everything in the way you want for a mechanic like that. An amazing achievement, and I'm sure that we all appreciate the fantastic work that Colin managed to achieve there back in the day. Right, because we got such an unusually long video, I'm going to leave the Crash re-reviews out on this particular episode of Crash. We'll have a look at one more game and then we'll have to wrap up today's Retro Robins. Hope you enjoyed today's show. Let's have a look at one new game that I've seen and played on the Spectrum. The system is the next one we're going to.